had an example of this, but I somewhere misplaced. So now lastly, I will come to the principle of double osteotomy. Now, in a situation where there is a curved bone, where there is a multiple apical deformity, there is a multiple apicals here, but we don't want to do everywhere osteotomy. We want to do two osteotomies. So what you have to do is you do an 87 degrees here and then 90 degrees here. So you will get the magnitude of the deformity. The total magnitude of the deformity is 41 degrees. So you have to do correction of 41 degrees. You can do osteotomy here, or you can do osteotomy here, or here and here. So in clinical situations, suppose this bone is not good, so you can't do osteotomy here, so you do here. Similarly, depending on the normal bone, you have to do an osteotomy. But what is important is when you do osteotomy 2, this angle and this angle should be equal to this angle, so that you will get the full correction. I'll show you one example of this. This is a severe O deformity, probably due to rickets in childhood, and this was the deformity. You do X-rays and plan the deformity. What you do is you do the mechanical axis here. This is 87 degrees, this is 90 degrees, and so the magnitude of the deformity is 45 degrees. So you have to do an osteotomy here and here. So you have to connect that, and the angle, this angle and this angle should be equal to this angle. This is usually happens. This is the outer angle of this triangle. So this angle is equal to this angle. And this is the last case. So osteotomy is done here. Similarly, there was 40 degrees here and 60 degrees of deformity in the tibia and 48 degrees on the left side. So you can see how you calculate this, and you can see on the other side you do a 20 degrees plus 25 degrees is equal to 45 degrees, and you do the planning on this side like this, and you will get the perfect correction. You can see here, this is the tibia. You have to do this is the tibia, this is the femur, which we have used nail here, and this is how the tibia, he wanted lengthening. The femur caused shortening because we have done closed wedge osteotomy, and here we have done open wedge osteotomy to compensate for the shortening that you have in the femur. So this is how you did the open wedge here in the tibia, and this is the, notice how the severe Grodzko deformity, a full correction of the deformity. This is how the full function was achieved, and thank you very much for your attention. Yes. Yes.
My question is that in that O-shaped deformity, in the femur, first you have cut the femur, then you have put the nail?
Yes. There are, four, you have to do 8 osteotomies, 4 on the femur and 4 on the tibia. You can't do in one patient at the same time 8 osteotomies. So we did femur first on both sides and put the nails there, and after, when the patient recovered after 8 days, we did the tibia at the same time. Femur first stage, tibia second stage.
And secondly, in the child where you was the procurvatum, where it was
everything was corrected.
So how you have done is that you have cut the above the deformity. Can
you
show me the slide there?
Yeah, above the deformity, 2 deformities, 2 osteotomies.
Yeah. Okay.
Sir, in osteotomy rule 3, you showed a case in which supracondylar osteotomy was done.
Yes.
You intentionally did not displace it so that the quadriceps doesn't get damaged.
Absolutely.
But that creates a hockey-shaped, ugly lower end of the femur.
Not ugly, but the mechanical axis are disturbed. It on the contrary, the femur was like this, it was causing deformity. The deformity was corrected. Clinically, it looks normal, but mechanically, there is a translation. There will be some problem with the mechanical axis.
So you will not...
It's just a translation.
You will never suggest any translation in supracondylar area.
Yeah, usually you should not do. Mechanical axis should be collinear. But this is a situation where you have to protect the quadriceps as well as get the deformity correction. There will be translation, but translation is not that much problem.
Sir, how much translation is permissible?
Thank-
How much translation you can do?
It automatically gets corrected. You know,
It get corrected, but
about say this was about 1 centimeter.
Can you show again that proper weight? That's the right.
Which one? That boy? Yes? This one?
How you have done this?
Why? Sir, see, you know how to calculate this 35 degrees angle because this and do this. And then this is the cora, and we did approximately above this where you can fix this fragment nicely. So you will see that the hinge is put at this level and cora is here. In the next slide you can see. See the hinges, this is the osteotomy site, you can see the osteotomy line here, and this is the put two rings are put here at the same level at the osteotomy ring. The cora is here. So you distract this and you will get the full correction like this. You can see here, this is distracted, you get correction, but no displacement occurs.
Did you find anything abnormalities in the knee joint?
There will be slight abnormality, slight changes in the knee joint as well as the ankle joint, but they are not much. We have seen fractures being united in slight translation, and the deformity is the mechanical axis is slightly disturbed, but clinically it is not so important. How much displacement is acceptable is not studied yet.
So, sir, you are talking about the procarutar deformity. What about the regarutar deformity? That is applicable also for osteotomy
Of course,
number 3.
of course, same, but you have to put the hinges anteriorly. Okay, thank you very much. Sir.
Deformity correction.
This. Oh.
Till they get ready, I would like to inform all the newcomers for Elizaro surgery that deformity correction is not as difficult as we really think. Eyeballing technique, all of you know as orthopedic surgeons. You all know how to correct deformities of various reasons using all your techniques other than Elizaro. The same principles you have to only refine a little bit what Dr. J.S. Kulkarni has told. So if you understand little geometry, things become much easier to do even without Elizaro surgery, all your deformity correction. Dr. Junjunwala, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about what are the principles of deformity correction, what is CORA, what is malalignment test. It is more or less a repetition what Dr. R.A. Agarwal has shown and some part of the Dr. Kulkarni has shown. So there may be some double fixation you may be able to make out. What is center of rotation of axis? The intersection point of the proximal and distal mechanical or anatomical axis lines is called the center of rotation of axis. You can see here, this is the proximal axis of this bone and this is the distal axis of this bone where they join. That is called the center of rotation of axis, that is CORA. The axis line of the proximal bone segment is called the proximal mechanical axis or proximal anatomical axis, because in tibia it is more or less same. Mechanical axis and anatomical axis of the tibia is same, but in femur it is little different. The axis line of the distal bone segment is called the distal mechanical axis or distal anatomical axis. Mechanical axis planning, reference point is joint center to joint center. The joint center here to the joint center here. Anatomical axis planning, reference point follows the mid-diaphyseal course and representing the diaphysis of the bone. In lower limb, femur has mechanical as well as anatomical axis. As Dr. Arya Agrawal has already shown you, there is a mechanical axis of the femur, there is an anatomical axis of the femur. There are two different axes in the femur, but in tibia, the mechanical axis and the anatomical axis are same. So when you want to decide to determine where is the cora, step 0, perform malalignment test on the frontal plane radiographs of the both limbs to determine whether mechanical axis deviation is present, and if so, from which source. So what you do here, you draw a center of the head and center of the ankle, you draw a line. If this line goes away from the center of the knee, there is definitely a mechanical axis deviation, and this is called a MAD, and this has been very well devised by Professor Paley. So draw the step 1 is draw the proximal mechanical axis line of the bone and draw the distal mechanical axis line of the bone. Here, this is the proximal axis, this is the distal axis, and the mechanical axis, you measure the outer angle of the bone, and if it is correct, that means there is no deformity in the femur, but there is a deformity in the tibia. So step 3, because the cora lies at the outer cortex of the tibia, in this particular case, if you see here, this cora lies at the outer cortex of the tibia. It is not a true cora, but possibly there should be two coras. Hence, you have to draw a third mechanical axis line, middle line, which represents mid-diaphyseal axis. So when this cora lies out of the bone, so this doesn't become a cora, there must be two deformities, and therefore you draw a line from this axis to this axis, and that becomes, there are two coras here, one here and one here. And that occurs particularly in bowing deformity, what Dr. Kulkarni has shown you. With cora we can analyze level of deformity, it is single level or multiple level, degree and magnitude of deformity, type of deformity, whether it is angulation deformity or translation deformity, plane of deformity, it is sagittal plane or coronal plane, to determine the true apex of the deformity, to choose the level of the osteotomy, to determine the position and type of hinges, whether we are going to put an open hinge, you want to put a distraction hinge, you want to put a compression hinge, or you want to put a translation hinge. Hinge is same, but the function of different these hinges at different way when to use. To understand the deformities of lower extremity, it is important to first establish parameters and limits of normal alignment. The exact anatomy of the femur, tibia, hip, knee and ankle is of great importance. There are two components, is joint alignment and joint orientation. Joint alignment refers to the collinearity of the hip, knee and ankle. Orientation refers to the position of each articular surface to the axis of the individual limb segment. And as a normal, as Dr. Arya Agarwal has shown you, you take the full limb X-ray. Previously, we used to take 1, 2, and 3 X-rays and join together. Nowadays, you can get a full X-ray possibility. There are films available. And when you join the center of the head to the center of the knee, ankle, it falls in the center of the knee. And it forms this outer distal axis, femoral axis is 87. Dr. Agarwal has said 88. It is always 87 plus minus 3. It may be less 3 minus 3 degrees, or it may be 3 degrees more. Here it remains about 90 degrees, and here it is 90 degrees. So you have to identify whether there is a malalignment in the femur, whether it is in the tibia, or whether it is in the knee joint. So basic principles of correction of deformity is that you have to put at the cora level hinge, you have to put a distraction rod, and you make two ring block at the distally, 2 ring block proximally. Now, the different types of hinges, if you put a hinge at the level of the outer cortex, suppose you want to do a opening wedge hinge, then the hinge has to be at the outer cortex of the bone. And then when you do distraction here, gradually, you get a nice wedge type of opening at the osteotomy level. And therefore, this is called a open wedge hinge. If you put the same hinge away from the bone and then distract it, you get little lengthening also. And you get little distraction as well as opening, and therefore it is called a distraction hinge. The same hinge at different level gives a different function. The third type is translation hinge. If you see here this axis and this axis, possibly it meets here, and this axis will meet here. And if you put a hinge at this level, you will get it angulation and translation like this. But if you put the hinge at distal level, at the level of the cora, where it is joining, the cora is here, osteotomy is here, and then you get a proper alignment. So that is called a translation hinge. And when you do a deformity, you have to use some olive wires, and that olive wire, where to use the olive wire, you have to find out. And this is a rule of thumb. When you want to do any stick, you hold it like this and correct it. So same way, at this thumb level, you must have a olive oil. At this finger level, you must have a olive oil here, and olive oil on this side, convex side. So when you try to correct it, you get a proper correction. So you have to use the olive wire here on the convex side and concave side, so that once you use your olive wire, then the displacement doesn't occur. If you don't use olive wires, you will get a displacement and you will get a wrong correction. So when you do the correction, it is corrected here. The order of deformity correction is, first you do angulation correction, then you do lengthening. You can use a distraction hinge for lengthening, and later on you can do more lengthening also. Then you correct the rotation, and then you correct the translation. How fast correct the deformity? That is 1 millimeter per day. And 1 millimeter is divided into 4, so 0.25 millimeter every 6 hourly you have to distract the bone. And this is the rule of angulation, rules of triangle. And the other way is, now see here there is a deformity here, cora is here, osteotomy you have done here, you have put olive wire here, olive wire here, olive wire here, and another olive wire here near the osteotomy. So these are the 4 olive wires, plus you have to put more wires to have more stability. But these, as a figure out here, this is put. Now you have put a distraction rod here. So you measure from the outer cortex of the bone to the distraction rod. Suppose this is 12 centimeters. Then you measure from the outer cortex to the inner cortex of the bone. Say that is 3 centimeters. So 12 divided by 3, that will be the 4. So you have to distract this rod 4 millimeter per day to get a distraction opening here on the concave border of the bone by 1 millimeter. So if you do 4 millimeter distraction here, then only you will get 1 millimeter here. If you distract 1 millimeter, you will get only 0.25 millimeter distraction. And therefore, if you don't keep it in mind properly, this will get united earlier. It is premature union you will get, and your distraction will stop. And therefore you must know how much to distract here. So it is 4 millimeter according to this calculation. What you do exactly, practically, you take a X-ray. There are 2 hinges and 1 distraction rod. So when you take a X-ray in such a way that the 2 hinges, they fall, the X-ray falls of 2 hinges on each other, so that you know the exact, suppose you are using a oblique plane deformity, then the hinges are in different planes. And if you take a AP X-ray particularly, you will get a X-ray of one hinge, another hinge, and distraction rod. That is not, you will not be able to calculate properly. Therefore, when the patient goes for X-ray, you rotate whatever it is necessary, put one hinge over the another hinge, and then take the X-ray, so that you will see only one hinge here and one distraction rod, and then you can measure the distance on the X-ray itself. So for example, here, this is the olive is put here, olive is put here, olive is put here, olive is on the convex side, and olive is on the concave side of the bone, along with the other more wires to stabilize the bone. So these are the 2 hinges and 1 distraction rod to be used. One ring here, another ring. So a block of 2 rings, is fixed on the proximal side. 2 rings are fixed on the distal side. Now where to put these hinges? The hinges are put at this level, in this hole, and on that side this hole, and that side this hole. And a distraction rod is put between here. So you can see here, and distract this, measure this distance from hinge to this, and hinge to the concave side, divide that, and you know how many millimeters distraction per day to do it to get 1 millimeter opening here. And that is what has happened here. Now you got a good wedge correction. You want sometimes some little lengthening also. You can put this hinge instead of this hole. You can put this hinge here, and do distraction, so that you get some distraction automatically and lengthening automatically. So preoperative planning, frontal plane deformities in lower limbs are common and may lead to late degeneration in the hip, knee and ankle. When a translation component associated, the true apex of the deformity will be proximal or distal to the apparent apex of the deformity. Hence, while correcting such deformities, hinge must be put at point of cora instead of apparent apex, so that correct translation will occur and malalignment test becomes normal. The foot forward view gives a better assessment of the tibia, whereas the knee cap forward view is a better assessment of the femoral component. Angular deformity in the tibia can confuse rotational deformity assessment in the femur. The most common way to assess rotation of the hip is with the patient prone and the knee bent. Why to correct the deformity? To prevent early degeneration of the joint. And what is malalignment test? Again, very important. Malalignment may arise from different femoral deformity, tibial deformity, knee joint laxity, intra-articular condylar deficiency of the knee joint, or combination of the above. Malalignment in the frontal plane leads to mechanical axis deviation and joint malorientation. Level of the deformity can be at the diaphyseal level, maybe at metaphyseal level, or maybe at epiphyseal level. But the metaphyseal level and epiphyseal, according to the practical point of view, they are so near each other. You call that as a juxta-articular deformity. So what is malalignment test? So same way you draw the center of the head, center of the ankle, it falls in the center of the knee. So this is perfect mechanical alignment, and this angle as 87 here, 90 here, 90 here. So in this case, draw the malalignment test, which falls away from the center of the knee. Then you measure these angles, which is 87, this is 90, that means there is no deformity in the tibia. Measure the mechanical axis of the femur and measure this angle, which is 95 degrees in this particular case. That shows that there is a valgus deformity of the femur. So this is what how you calculate step 1 malalignment line,
Rajat.
which away from the tibia. Then mechanical axis, measure this angle. In this case it is 95 degrees, measure this angle 87 degrees.
1045.
That means there is a valgus deformity of the femur in this particular case. Another case, here the malalignment test again falls medial to the joint line. So you measure the femoral condyle line. Third is the mechanical axis. You bring the mechanical axis, measure this angle, which is 87. Then you measure the tibial angle, and which is 81 degrees. That means there is a deformity in the tibia. So if you do the same thing here, measure the condyles of the femur, measure the condyles of the tibia, mechanical axis 87 degrees, mechanical axis of the tibia 87 degrees, and though this is a malalignment test, shows that there is a deformity. Now you can find out where is the deformity, because these two condyle lines, condyle line of the femur and tibia is different, which shows 5 degrees laxity of the ligament, showing the deformity of the joint itself.
Sir,
See, difacial deformity of the tibia, which you can
Jhunjhunwala
make
sir.
out. Again, same malalignment test, and draw the femoral mechanical axis, draw the distal tibial axis, and this becomes the cora, which is 26 degrees in this particular case. So you have to correct the tibial deformity by 26 degrees by distracting the hinges for 26 days.
Jhunjhunwala sir.
Yeah.
Excuse me, sir. It's getting more than 1 hour late. If you can rush through, we will be very happy.
You want
That
me
is-
to go fast?
Little more fast. Sorry, sir. Excuse me, but
Okay. Okay. Juxta-articular tibial deformity. In this case, again the mechanical axis. You can see here the mechanical axis goes like that, the mechanical axis goes like that, and they join here. So the cora becomes at this joint level, and there is a juxta-articular deformity of the tibia. So if you do osteotomy, as Dr. Kulkarni has told you, you get a parallel line, and therefore the osteotomy you cannot do here. Do the osteotomy at the subtibial level, subtubercle level, and keep the hinge at this level where there is a cora, and then you get a proper alignment. So this is the another way of doing the, this is a femoral difacial valgus deformity correction. This is a juxta-articular deformity of the femur model. These are the different lines you have to draw, and you can put the hinges properly. This is the hinge at this level. The yellow shows the hinge and osteotomy at the supracondylar level. So uniplanar deformities are frequent, misinterpreted as biplanar deformities. A common type of malunion demonstrates a varus deformity on AP and procurvatum deformity on the lateral view. But the two bone ends consolidated with one apex, so the deformity is uniplanar in an oblique plane. Rotation of the limb segment in the line with the deformity reveals that bone is straight. So these are the different oblique deformities which I am skipping. You have to calculate different oblique deformities, and these are the few x-rays. This is the correction. 15 days, 52 days, good distraction, regenerate formation. Most important is when the correction has occurred, the hinges you have to remove, and remove these hinges, remove this distraction rod, and put 4 rods between these two proximal and distal rings. And then if you want more distraction, you can do more distraction along with this because of these rods. But the patient cannot take full weight because of the hinges, and therefore when the correction is corrected, you put these rods and patient can walk with the full weight. So this is after 4 months the consolidation has occurred, good alignment of the limb. This is another case, varus deformity of the lower end of juxta-articular tibia. This is the correction. This is another case. This is the another case. And you got a complete correction of the juxta-articular deformity of the tibia. And you can see here what was the deformity before, and now it is straight after using a Elizarov frame. Another case, Blount's disease. This is a deformity at the upper end of femur, and this osteotomy is lower end at the below the tibial tubercle, and good correction achieved. Another case of malunited tibial condyle. This is another case with septic arthritis of the knee with 115 degrees flexion deformity. Two hinges were put here. The two rings block was put here, two ring block was put here. The hinge was put in the center of the knee, and distraction done gradually. These are the hinges, and this knee got straightened out completely. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I was sorry I interrupted you, but then Dr. Junjunwala would have told you more in detail of everything, every situation that you have, and you would have become super experts immediately. I think we'll break for tea now after this session. After tea, we'll have a few lectures and then start on the workshop. Pardon? Tea, 15 minutes. All right. Before we wait to start this lecture, I should thank the organizers, Asami India. Dr. Junjunwala is President of International Asami, and he is President-elect for 2015 for IOA. Dr. Agarwal is President of Asami India. Dr. Manish, Secretary, who have invited me to this IOACon workshop on Elizarov. I should thank you very much for this. So biomechanics is a very dry subject, and having done 20 years of Elizarov surgery at Bangalore,
15 minutes.
I am still not able to understand everything about it. It appears to be very complicated. I'll try to make it as simple as possible for you all. We have the external circular fixator of Professor Elizarov. The best thing that has happened in orthopedics, I think, is the finding of Professor Elizarov of production of new bone, which was known as osteogenesis. And later, when we came to know that it is not only the bone which is produced as new bone, it is all the tissues which are produced as new bone. So that came to be termed as neohistogenesis. And the basic principle of Professor Elizarov was to give tension stress to the tissues. Like if you have seen the circus boys and girls, they can bend and put their head between the legs and look that side. If I ask you to do it, you will not be able to do it. Those other boys are also not able to. Why is it only the circus girls and boys are able to do? I give this example only for you all to understand that when you keep stretching your tissues in the body, you can flex your spine more, your body more, so that you can do all kinds of circuses of that kind. And that is because your tissues become more lax as you stretch. So all of you know about it, and that is known as tension stress. So with this tension stress, the regenerate is produced, new tissues are, everything grows along with the bone. When you limb length, the skin, the soft tissues, vessels, nerves, everything grows, and it grows the same tissues. So you have some great magic here where new things are, new tissue is regenerated, because of which what was not possible to be treated earlier, what was to be amputated, is being treated by Elizarov's method very easily. So you should know two things. Number one is this Ilizarow's principle of tension stress, which is used to lengthen the limb to correct the deformities, and his Ilizarov external fixator, the ring fixator. So Professor Ilizarov, known as magician of Kurgan, has probably produced the most stunning discovery, due to which the whole orthopedics thinking and imagination has changed. It wasn't there during our MS course and all that, and only after many years after that we came to know about it, and we have learned the most difficult way. Now we intend to make everything very easy for you and not complicated, to see that you all start doing Ilizarov surgeries. The best way to start is to understand the fixator on one side, to understand his principles on the other side. So today I will be talking to you about a little bit of biomechanics and make it easy, because this is a basic course, though this lecture was for the advanced course. So you have the conventional circulars of many other people, but Professor Ilizarov's circular has become the most world famous. The pins are there of various sizes. During instrumentation, I think Dr. Agarwal will be able to tell you. So we have, with all external fixators, various varieties of biomechanics where there is loading, known as axial loading, there is lateral bending and shearing forces which are acting because you have put a fixator outside the limb, and you should know where the fixator is holding, how far or near it is holding, and how it is controlling your bone. If you control your bone ends which are corticotomized or broken, or if there is a deformity to correct, you will get the best of results if you know biomechanics a little bit better than what you know now. Probably you know more, but I would like to just tell you a little bit basics of this. Now, for example, here you have the ring fixator. What do you think this situation is? What do you think this situation is? What do you think this situation is? Now we have a central circle with a bone, and we have two transosseous wires. These transosseous wires, you know this guitar and sitar, our stringed instruments, they are locked on one side, and you have a nut bolt which the more you tighten, the more strength it gets stretched, and when you move it, you get a different high pitch sound. Higher the pitch of the sound is when you tension it more. But a wire which you can turn and bend has become stiff. So this is what is done to these wires. So when you tension the wires, it holds the bone. So depending on the amount of tension, how much amount of tension you have to do is what you have to learn. So before you learn that, you must know that in a bone, which is central to the limb, if you put 90 degrees wires, it is going to hold that particular ring extremely well. As you reduce this angle from 90 degrees and get it closer, it means your ring is not holding onto the bone very well as this. So if you understand that much, you will understand that supposing you have a ring with two wires like this, it means that particular ring with wire is holding that bone at that point very well, but here it is not holding very well. Over and above that, we have a situation where the bone is in the corner. So if the bone has gone to the corner and you have 90 degrees, it does hold very well, but not as good as this. If you understand this particular principle, it is suffice. So when you have a situation like this, or even like this, it's going to hold very well. But when you have a situation like this, what you need to do to make it more stable? Can anybody tell?
One more wire.
One more wire. Sir, not for you also. Alright, that's fine. So you have some kind of linear stiffness on this, bending stiffness. So when you put pressure like this, the more and more you put pressure, it may break away. So the vertical axial pressure are forming deforming forces, and this is what happens when you are not only compressing, when you are stretching also. So there is something known as elasticity of this fixator, depending on the distance, depending on this, how much of mobility is possible in this. And then there is shear stiffness. You know about fracture neck femur, so I don't think I'll have to tell you about shear stiffness. McNamara's osteotomy is very successful surgery, because a transverse fracture can get compressed well, but an angulated fracture, when you try to compress, it will separate out. So if you think of the idea that if you compress fracture very strongly, it is going to do well, I think it is wrong. You know about medial malleus also. Tension band wiring you are doing only for a transverse fracture of medial malleus, because it is, the wire is holding in a tension the two fragments which are getting compressed. But when you have a vertical medial malleus fracture, if you put a tension band wire, the whole medial malleus can come out. So same way the bones will not listen to you, and when you put an Elizero fixator on and start doing something like that and it goes wrong, you say no, Elizero fixator is not good, Elizero surgery is not good. No, it is we who have to understand orthopedics first. So please, all of you, first be orthopedic surgeons. Once you are orthopedic surgeons, you know your orthopedic basics, then you apply the Elizero external fixator, Elizero principles, then you will be master of Elizero surgery very soon, right? So you have single plane fixators, you have ring fixators which can give tension and stress on these things. So if you understand that, it's very good. So in fixator, there is an ability to resist compression and distraction and this one. So what happens, Giovanni, if I am correct, I am not sure, from Italy, had pronounced in one of his publications that an external fixator is a non-union machine, right? And he was very correct, because all literature, external fixators, non-union was more than union. Why? We had not understood the basics of this law. And now with Elizero's external fixator and the principles, if you understand properly, it is a machine for non-union, is what I say. Giovanni, I am not sure about the name, I am so sorry, said that it is a non-union machine, an external fixator is a non-union machine. But from all our Elizero surgeries point of view, it is a machine for non-union. Do you understand? So please change that concept of what the Italians had told. So here you have eggshell loading and bending loading, where comparative analysis with the ring fixators and the other fixators. In the ring fixators, it's common sense. The whole limb is controlled in circular axis all round. So only the axial portion is free for movement. That is what when they say micromotion occurs with these things, when you put the wires, occurs in the axial segment. Whereas the bending loading, if you try to bend this with the Elizero fixator on, which is controlling both the other upper and lower ends very well, it can compress, but it cannot bend so easily. That is why you get very good results with using Elizero external fixator. So the others are there, comparative analysis of all these things. I don't think it is necessary to know so much in detail for all of you. If you understand what I have just now told you, that when it comes to unilateral fixator, the stiffness is more, micromotion is minimum. When you use half pins, what happens? The Elizero wires are there where it also takes a spring action on it. So you have that axial loading in the midline. That is how the bones get compressed. The AO department, Swiss department, they all came out with fractures being compressed maximally. So you got the Muller's plate, you got everything to see that the fractures are compressed maximally. And we did get good results, excellent anatomical situations with plates that time. But with time, what happened? Even with tight internal fixation with plates, the exposure was too much. The tension to be given for that, another device, some more exposure, no periosteum. In spite of good alignment, non-union rate was very, very high. But if you put an external fixator like Elizero for regular fractures also, you can give very, very predictable and excellent results. And over and above that, the biggest advantage with Elizero surgery is, after surgery you need not operate. You can look at the AP and lateral views. Sir has just now shown you, Dr. Kulkarni has just now shown you that if you put hinges, if there is any angulation you want to correct, you can correct. If any translation you want to correct, you can correct. Any deformity you want to correct at the fracture site or limb lengthening site, you can correct it by just adjustments in the OPD. It is extremely easy if you understand all these things, that using an Elizero external fixator by far has got many, many advantages compared to using all other fixators, or using internal fixation methods. I am not telling you not to use internal fixation methods or to use Elizero methods. I have not come here to sell anything of Elizero or other external fixators, but we are here to try to train you and give you confidence that you also can do Elizero external fixators, all those who have not done, in a very simple way. And if you start it with the tibia, it is the simplest, right? With time you will come to know by today how to fix onto the tibia and femur. So the dynamizations are axial and bending types of dynamizations. You have known about dynamization, so I will not tell. Then cyclic bending and micromotion. Cyclic bending is not beneficial for a fracture healing, translation shear also produces more non-union. Then, anything? In limb lengthening, if you have a stable ring fixation, you get regenerate which is parallel to each other. If it is not stable, then you start getting fibrous tissue and trabecula, and if there is more shear and more movement at the limb lengthening site, what is going to happen? Instead of bone tissue, you are going to get cartilage tissue. This is not good for getting a good end results. So what you need to see that you have to have a stable ring situation. So for a stable ring situation, I had showed you the first photograph where you must have cross wires as far as possible. Obviously you cannot have cross wires many a times because you cannot put a vertical wire in the tibia going through the muscles as well as going through all the vessels and nerves. So you need to have anatomical considerations. So in anatomical considerations, if you are putting two oblique wires, then you need to put one more wire a little distal to the ring or proximal to the ring, which is going to help you out in giving better stability. So for each ring, if you put two wires or maybe a third wire, you are going to get good stability for that particular ring. And after that, a segment of bone you want to hold. Suppose there is a fracture in the middle third of the tibia. You put one ring near the tibial fracture and one ring near the knee joint proximally. That becomes a proximal block. So when you put 2 or 3 wires there, 2 or 3 wires here, that proximal block controls and makes the the situation very stable. Similarly, you make a distal situation very stable. So what happens? You have 2 blocks which are very stable. Then you can control the fracture site for lengthening or corticotomy site for lengthening or compression and getting a union. Please tell me the time when it is getting over. I'll finish early.
1 minute.
1 more minute, right? So regarding shear, you should see that there should not be any shear stress on that, and axial stiffness. Okay, we can skip this. Now this depends. Extrinsic factors are the fixator which is on the outside, and it depends on all these particular points. Intrinsic factors about the wire spread, I have told you already. The wire tensioning of the wire, we have tensioners. The tensioning has to be done. We will show you how the tensioning is done about the wires. And then the diameter of the ring. When you choose the diameter of the ring, you all know if you are closer to the leg, it gives you more stability. If the rings are very large, it doesn't give you stability. So you have to select approximately 2 finger breadths away from the skin. The olive wires, sir has showed you in deformity correction how to use them. The diameter of the rings I have just now showed you. The ring arrangement, just like any other external fixator, you should have one ring very close to the fracture site as possible and one ring far away from the fracture site as possible. According to that, you have your preoperative planning so that it becomes very easy. Intrinsic factors, of course, are the bones, the situation, the disease, and the muscles, the gaps that are there. Based on that, you are going to get different types of problems with that. For example, these bone ends, if you try to make them unite, even if they unite, you know very well as orthopedic surgeons that this is much better than having pointed bones. Right? So I think with this little short lecture to highlight on how and where to put your rings and pins, it should be helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Yeah, this is regarding the rings and pins, what about the hinges and where to put it?
Pardon?
You told about the biomechanics of the rings and hinges, the rings and pins. The biomechanics is regarding the hinges, the position of the hinges and all.
The position of the hinges, sir has given a big lecture to you, Dr. Jun. He has given. We'll also show you during the workshop where if you put the hinge, how you get an open wedge. If you learn the first step of open wedge, close wedge and in between type of situations, I think you'll learn where to put the hinges very easily. That's a very simple situation. We'll tell you during.
Pins.
Sir?
Roll of threaded pins.
Okay, the half pins I have not put in this. Now what happens is the Ilizaro wires give a little bit of movement between the rings. So that is why you have micromotion of the fracture site which stimulates the fracture to heal. When you put one half pin, that amount of stiffness increases between the two rings. When you put 2, it increases. When you put 3, it becomes really very stiff. It works like an external fixator using only half pins. So my advice is to try to put half pins only where required, when required by all of you depending on different situations, because putting half pins on the medial surface of tibia is very easy for all of you. So when you start learning, you put Ilizaro wires which are safe to be put initially wherever you know no structures come. For example, from medial side of the tibial condyle to lateral side, you have no structures, the skin and bone. So the wire goes in very easily. So you can put your simple wire or olive wire on that side, whereas on the medial surface in the middle third of the leg, the tibia, medial surface of the tibia, your wire can go there, and you can put one shank pin on this side. So one transosseous wire on one side, 90 degrees to that one shank pin will make that ring stable. But the more shank pins you use, you are going to get reduced micromotion in the fracture side, in which case you have to start doing compression distraction techniques, weight bearing post-operatively and walking to achieve union. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We don't have time. We are running short of time. Next. Dimitri. Now we are inviting, no, which? Oh, this. My lecture is not there. Dimitri Yurievich from Elizarov Center, Kurgan, is going to talk on Elizarov frame tips and tricks. You have got 15 minutes time.
Treatment of defect non-union in the tibial midshaft using transosseous osteosynthesis with the Elizarov apparatus. A 17 patient was involved in a road traffic accident in 2008, sustaining an open fracture of the midshaft of the left tibia. He underwent 2 procedures at a local hospital within 1 year and developed post-traumatic osteomyelitis with sinuses healed in 2010. The patient referred to the Russian Elizarov Center, Kurgan, Russia in 2013, presented with a functional shortening of 3 centimeters, 5-degree pathological mobility in the mid-tibia, combined contracture of the left ankle, and equinus cavus varus deformity of the left foot. The radiograph shows defect non-union in the tibial midshaft and diastasis of 5 mm, bone fragments being incongruent, hypertrophic and sclerotic with end plates formed, equinus varus cavus deformity of the left foot observed. Surgical procedure performed includes fibular osteotomy in the middle third, an open reconstruction of the bone, proximal tibial osteotomy, and Elizarov frames applied to the tibia and the foot. The patient is placed in the supine position on the operating table. The skin of the limb is cleansed to the upper third of the femur. The limb is covered with drapes and well positioned on the operating table, leaving exposed the segment of interest. Wires are placed in the proximal tibial metaphysis, avoiding scars. Olive wires are driven to prevent bone displacement during lengthening and to improve stability of bone fixation. Proximal ring is attached to tibia with the bone being centered inside the ring. Then the wires are tightened and tensioned. 4 connecting rods are attached to the proximal ring, and another ring is placed, maintaining central tibial position inside the Elizarov frame. Wires are placed in the distal portion of the proximal fragment. The wires are tightened and tensioned in a similar manner. Antiseptic sponge is used to prevent a skin burn injury while driving wires at a high drilling speed. Olives are placed with regard to the deformity, and the skin is cut to get olives through. Pathological mobility is identified manually, and a level of wires to be placed in the proximal part of the distal fragment is determined to provide maximal stability. Wires with stoppers are placed for realignment of the segment. The ring is attached with regard to the deformity, maintaining the bone being centered inside the frame and the wires tensioned. The distal ring is mounted at the distal tibial metaphysis using 4 guiding rods, with tibia being in the center of the frame. The wires are driven in the distal tibial metaphysis. 1 wire is in the distal tibial metaphysis, Another wire transfixes both tibia and fibula. The wires are tightened and tensioned, and the Ilizarov external fixation of tibia is completed. To correct foot deformity, for optimal anatomical and functional restoration of the limb, a frame is applied to the foot bones. A pair of crossing wires is placed in metatarsal bones to fix the forefoot. A ring is mounted to the forefoot and hinges are placed to correct the equinus of the foot. Due to contracture of the ankle joint, partial correction of the foot was produced by traction to be continued in the post-operative period. Wires are placed in the calcaneus to provide hindfoot fixation. Hinges are assembled to connect forefoot and hindfoot, as well as hindfoot and the distal tibia. An incision of 2 to 3 centimeters is produced to provide blunt approach to fibular osteotomy. The bone is pre-drilled along the line of fibular osteotomy, getting perforation holes to prevent fibular sprinting, producing osteotomy using osteotomes. Fibular osteotomy is achieved by brisk, abrupt impacts of a hammer over osteotome placed over perforation holes. Then the chisel is rotated to check whether osteotomy is complete. With the fibular osteotomy performed, realignment of the non